My name is Eliza. I turned 35 this year on a summer's day when cicadas sang. I received a call to the Oval Office. Mom, I mean President, what is it? I inquired as she appeared to be disturbed by the heat and was fanning herself. With her stunning profile turned towards me, my mother, the president, declared bluntly, "I've decided to hand over the company to your sister, so you're fired as of today." For a split second, I wasn't sure if the sunshine coming through the window was real or not. What? I believe I spoke inanely and incoherently. My mother looked at me, irritated, and said, "Did you not hear me? You've been let go. You're no longer needed here. Make your move by the end of this month's end." She closed her fan as she was speaking, returning her attention to the papers on her desk as though her work was done. I took my time processing what she had said, alone in the president's office as the sound of cicadas filled the air. "Do you remain here? Return to your work," my mother yelled. "If you'll excuse me," I replied as I mechanically retreated and went out into the corridor. About 10 people worked for our company, which was a modest 2-story structure, and they were all engaged in destruction. The company was family-owned. With nearly all power in her hands, my mother held the position of president, followed by her aunt and her husband as vice presidents, and my mother's cousin and her spouse as managing directors. I worked at an accounting firm after high school, but when I was 25, my mother said, "We don't have an accountant. Will you leave your family when things go tough? The last to suffer would be you." I felt like she was dragging me into the group. Furthermore, I wasn't just given accounting-related chores to complete. My mother gave me all of the household tasks and secretarial job. I was even sent out on sales calls when we were short-staffed, which effectively made me a jack-of-all-trades within the organization. I tried not to burden people by working diligently from dawn to night, and somehow, over the course of the last 10 years, I was able to complete the work. At 33, Samantha was 3 years younger than me, had been assured she would take over the company. She'd only been working for our organization for 2 years. Samantha would frequently grumble before coming to work with us and would say, "It just doesn't suit me." She bemoaned, "I can't work for such low pay," as work conditions tightened once she turned 30, and she passed her days doing nothing but sitting around the house. At that point, my mother stated, "Samantha, there's a suitable job for you." Samantha was therefore welcomed by my mother to our company as a managing director. Even after 10 years with the organization, I continue to work regularly. People around us were startled at how differently we were treated, but I reasoned that it was only a coincidence because my mother had always preferred my sister since we were young. She said, "You're really adorable, Samantha," and bought everything from clothes to toys for the stunning Samantha. "You look great in this attire." However, given hand-me-downs from cousins and neighborhood kids, I was told, "This is enough for you," despite not being as cute. I didn't understand why I was treated this way when I was younger. I ignored my fixed appearance and focused on helping out and studying because all I wanted was my mother's attention. Nevertheless, my mother didn't seem to care about me. She hardly even looked at my straight-a report card before she stamped it. I even thought about getting plastic surgery if the only way to be liked was to be attractive. During my high school years, my aunt saw my situation and explained to me why my mother was ignoring me. Although my father had actually absconded with a woman from the corporation the year Samantha was born, I had been informed that he had died. This woman was not as pretty as my mother, and she was older, and there was something about her that I recognized. According to my aunt, your mother's pride prevented her from accepting the fact that a lady older than her and with a worse appearance had taken her husband. She did, however, appear to smile as though to suggest, "Serves her right." My aunt, who happens to be my mother's sister, shares a similar appearance with me, neither extremely attractive nor unattractive. Although she caused me pain as well, she was competent at her job, primarily because of her charisma. My mother, who took over the business from my late grandfather at the age of 32 after my father departed, used her attractiveness to draw in customers and improve output. Demolishment became necessary as more and more buildings outlived their useful lives. So even my aunt and her husband, and my mother's cousin and her husband, held her in high regard. The industry as a whole has been facing a common problem of how to strike a balance between actual spending and demolition fees due to the increased costs of transporting and disposing of industrial trash. The performance of our company has been deteriorating. To be honest, it's been very close to not missing the monthly payroll. During this time, as Samantha started working at the company, I became anxious about how we would cover her salary. Then my mother said, "I'll cut your salary to pay for her. Since we're family, it's only natural." When I logically argued, "Even if you reduce my salary, it won't cover the managing director's pay," she forcefully replied, "It's your job as a veteran to figure it out. Just do it." Tentatively, I murmured, "Shouldn't Samantha start as a regular employee first?" My mother glared at me sharply and snapped, "Who are you speaking to? It's not your place to say." At that time, we lived in the same house, but Samantha didn't contribute a penny, while I paid $1,500 every month. Of course, even after Samantha joined our company, she didn't contribute financially at home. Growing up, I took care of the household chores as my busy mother couldn't. Naturally, I took on the responsibilities, while Samantha acted as if it was only natural and did nothing. "Sis, isn't dinner ready yet?" When I was working overtime, Samantha would call to hurry me for dinner. "Hey, I'm at work. Can't you just make something yourself?" I replied. "What should I make? The kitchen is your domain, right? I don't want to use it without permission and get scolded. You got mad last time, remember?" She brought up a long-past incident. Ultimately, not attempting to cook, Samantha generally doesn't clean up or return things to their places. It seems she still holds a grudge from when I pointed this out once before, or rather she uses that as a reason to justify doing nothing. Reluctantly, I would return home to cook dinner, only to head back to the office to work overtime afterward. My mother rarely prepared dinner, and on many days, even if there was food ready, she would just eat whatever she wanted instead. Lately, as my mother began taking Samantha out for business more frequently, the need for me to cook dinner decreased, but the costs of these outings continued to trouble us. This year, my mother turned 63, and she started complaining more about various pains in her body and how heavily drinking affected her. It was during such a time that I was called into the president's office and told, "I'm handing the company over to Samantha, so you, the ugly duckling, are fired as of today." Considering my mother's past actions, it made sense that she would hand the presidency over to Samantha. Reflecting on it, Samantha is now 32, the same age my mother was when she first became president. Perhaps my mother thought that Samantha could use her beauty to attract clients, just as she had. However, the idea of being fired because of my appearance was something I simply couldn't accept. Even if my salary were transferred to Samantha, I felt there was hardly any real benefit. When I discussed this with my aunt, it seemed the news of Samantha becoming president had already spread among the employees. But the news of my firing was new to her as well. After pondering a bit, my aunt said, "Well, I'm not entirely sure, but it seems Samantha doesn't like it when everyone tells her, 'Don't worry, we'll ask Eliza,' whenever she says she wants to do something. Maybe that's related." "But that's because people stopped asking Samantha because her work was sloppy, right?" I said. "Yes," my aunt nodded. "Samantha was incapable of keeping deadlines, often messed up phone calls, and her work was riddled with typos despite having work experience. Perhaps because of her good looks, men around her had covered for her, leaving her unaware of her lack of skills." My aunt understood this point too well. "That's true, but she probably thinks you're in her way," she said, and with a deep sigh added, "Oh dear, I can't believe she's firing you. That would ruin our company," but her nature of not standing up to my mother prevented any protest from her. I felt a sense of disgust at being related by blood to my mother, my sister, and this unreliable aunt. So both my mother and my sister dislike me, I said in a dejected tone. My aunt hesitated before replying, "Well, yes, your mother is harsh, but you might be better off working elsewhere. You're too capable to not start over somewhere else." There was a slight warmth of kinship in her eyes as she advised me to resign. Standing in the company, dyed red by the summer twilight, I vaguely watched a mirage in the distance. Maybe it's time to end this. I felt a sense of liberation spreading through my chest. Turning to my aunt, I smiled calmly for the first time since joining the company. Surprised by my smile, my aunt returned it with a sad expression. Then I spent my remaining days busily preparing handover documents and organizing everything for anyone to understand. Before I knew it, the end of the month, my last day, had arrived. When I went to the president's office at the end of the day, the sound of cicadas was no longer audible, and my mother and sister were laughing and chatting joyfully. "That salesman definitely has a thing for you." "You mean that bald guy?" "Absolutely no way." They laughed without noticing my presence until I deliberately coughed. Samantha, looking puzzled, asked, "What's up? We don't need dinner today." "Today is my last day here. Thank you for everything up until now." "Oh, was that today? I totally forgot." They burst into laughter again. Realizing I would no longer have to see their faces made me feel refreshed. "I'm also moving out of the house, so please take care," I bowed. My mother replied with a robotic, "Yes, thank you for your hard work." As I emotionlessly closed the door behind me, from inside I could hear my sister's voice. "Now we won't have to see that annoying face anymore." "Watch me," I muttered to myself as I left the company I had worked at for many years. A week later, after finishing paperwork at a school, I checked my smartphone and noticed 14 missed calls from my mother in just 2 hours. A bad feeling washed over me, so I put my phone on silent mode and took care of other errands before heading home. The calls from my mother continued to increase, and by the next morning, they had totaled 80. The last call came just after 2 a.m. Of course, I had no intention of calling her back. She was now a stranger to me, and I didn't want to hear her voice, fearing it might make me succumb to her demands again. For 35 years, I was dominated by my mother. To break free from her control, I decided to ignore her calls completely. Although I could have blocked her, I left the calls unchecked as evidence in case she took any obsessive actions. For a while, there were nearly 100 calls a day. At first, checking the missed calls was depressing, but as I got used to it, I began to feel a sense of schadenfreude, imagining my mother struggling without me. It was then that I truly realized how terribly she had treated me. A year has passed since then. By that time, the calls from my mother had ceased, and I had no idea what was happening with her over the past year. I worked various temp jobs while attending a correspondence course for tax accountants, passing the exam successfully. My prior work experience and the diverse tasks I handled at my mother's company had honed my ability to oversee operations, making me valuable in my new position at a major accounting firm. Only now did I start to appreciate the past for having equipped me with these skills. My colleagues at the new workplace were all kind, and we helped each other progress with our work, a stark contrast to the days when everything was dumped on me and I had to research and work alone until midnight. One day, while visiting a client near my mother's company for work, I passed by her office. The windows and entrance were noticeably dirty, and the houseplants I had taken care of were completely withered. On the way back, I unexpectedly ran into my mother coming out of the company. Upon spotting me, she exclaimed, "Oh," and approached me. Instinctively fearing I would be scolded, I covered my face with my bag. But she came closer with an unexpectedly affectionate voice. "Oh my, where have you been, Eliza?" I felt a wave of disgust and shrank away. "Do you know how many times I called you? Did you change your smartphone? It seemed that it never crossed her mind that I was ignoring her calls because I disliked her after all she had put me through. I was utterly baffled by her way of thinking. Ignoring my stunned expression, she continued, "Oh, but I'm glad I found you. Look at the state of this company, isn't it terrible? Come back, starting tomorrow. I'm not mad." "What?" "Like I said, I've forgiven you for leaving a year ago, so please come back to the company tomorrow." It took me a moment to comprehend what she was saying. In her mind, it must only be the image of a young me running back to her in tears that remained. "Mom, I'm already working at another company and I'm enjoying it there." As I hesitated to tell her, her expression suddenly turned demonic. "What? Even though our company is in such a mess? Who cares about other companies? You belong to me," she yelled in the middle of the street. "Wait a minute, you're the one who fired me, right? What about Samantha? What happened to her?" Snorting, she retorted, "Seriously, I thought Samantha would be more useful, but she messed up by dating 3 clients at the same time. It all fell apart instantly. It would have been fine if she hadn't got caught. Then I put her in the office for a while so she wouldn't be seen, but she can't even clean properly and she's terrible at accounting. We can't afford to hire someone else. It's really troublesome." After venting her frustrations, she smiled at me and said, "That's why it's your turn, Eliza. Our office has been a mess since you left. You need to take responsibility." Before I resigned, I had created a proper handover manual and explained everything to Samantha. Most likely, Samantha didn't check anything, and my mother probably didn't listen to that part. Even if she did, she either doesn't remember or pretends she didn't hear. After all, there's no responsibility to speak of when she was the one who fired me. Besides, ever since you left, there have been a string of clients who cut off transactions. Don't you find that odd? They said they couldn't trust us anymore because you were gone. That's why I want you back. Having worked there for many years, I was familiar with several of the clients. My mother denigrated my appearance, but there were people who genuinely appreciated my skills. When I resigned, I called to thank the people I owed favors to, and they asked why I was leaving. It was difficult to explain the unreasonable reason for my dismissal, but thinking it was my last chance, I revealed everything. It seems that after hearing why I was fired, these clients decided to stop dealing with my mother's company. Their approach was always the same. They pushed things through by force, shifted the blame onto others, and left all the cleanup to someone else. This had always been their modus operandi. Biting my lower lip, I thought of the faces of my current colleagues, reminding myself that this was the real, normal world, and I had been in an abnormal environment. I vowed not to succumb to this pressure anymore. Responsibility or not, it was you, the president, who fired me, Mom. Sensing a change in my tone, my mother briefly looked surprised. And besides, wasn't the reason for my dismissal that I was unattractive? Before I knew it, our argument had drawn a crowd, apparently intrigued by the spectacle. My mother, noticing the stares from those around her, hesitated before saying, "Did I really say that? Could you have misheard me?" "No, I obviously heard you. You mentioned firing the ugly person and giving my lovely sister control of the business. I was unable to understand your meaning. You choose to give the firm to Samantha, who has only been here for 2 years and hardly does her job well, even though I've worked hard for 10 years. I disagree with your assessment." There was a stir in the crowd when I spoke firmly. "Are you serious? Is that accurate? That was said by her own mother? That sounds ridiculous, doesn't it? Do they actually have a relationship?" Some even started filming the incident, but I was too furious to be concerned. The accusing looks caused my mother's face to become pale, and she started perspiring. "Eliza, I think you misinterpreted. Let's talk about this in private." "Are you misinterpreting? What is not clear? Why not say it out loud right now if you didn't say it?" She grew silent, and everyone around her began to whisper, "Well, since she's stopped talking, it must be real. I find it unbelievable." People started muttering in shock. There was a sudden crack in my mother. "Enough already. You deserve it for being so ugly and depressing," she yelled. "Those who are ugly ought to silently submit to those who are lovely. All you are good at is that." The onlookers were horrified by her nasty statements and started recording right away. Ugly should obey the beautiful lady appears. The video became viral shortly after it was labeled in that way. After my mother's business contacts saw this video, all of the companies immediately stopped doing business with her. It appears that there had been pretty serious offenses, such as illegal dumping and book falsification, during the year I was gone. The clients broke up relationships one by one when the video became viral. After the company failed, my mother and Samantha came to my flat once, but I didn't let them in because I was now unemployed. They eventually relocated to a dilapidated 45-year-old studio apartment without a bathroom, where they worked temporary and part-time jobs and lived in constant terror of creditors. Samantha was immediately despised by her coworkers and had to change professions regularly as a result of her attempt to use her beauty to woo her male coworkers for an easy time. Regarding my mother, the video never went offline on the internet, and her coworkers shunned her. She continued to work alone and in silence. I made a boyfriend at my new work in the interim. Although he lacks physical attractiveness, he is serious and truthful, and he appreciates my commitment to my career. We intend to tie the knot shortly. I live my life really appreciating that I've always taken my obligations seriously.